Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today, we have such a fun assortment of segments we are going to be talking about today. Like we do on every main episode of the show, we are, of course, going to be talking about two brand new releases from two artists. We're going to be talking about the new album from Sufjan Stevens and collaborator Angelo De Augustine. We're going to be talking about Beginner's Mind, and we are going to be talking about the new album from Poppy, Flux. And on this week's Record Club, we are going to be talking about my recommended record, Toby Max, Welcome to Diverse City. Can't even say the title without laughing.
And listen. If you don't know what that is, you have two days to go and listen to it and do no research and just put it on and experience a world beyond your imagination. And
world of pure imagination.
A world of post 9/11 white embarrassment.
Yeah. So you just
that's the alternate title.
Even if you've never heard of Toby Mac, just trust us. I mean, the video we're going to make, you're going to want to watch. And unfortunately, that will mean having to experience the record. Or, you know what? You probably could even enjoy the video, even if you've never heard. I mean, that would be hilarious. I don't know how it would go down, but you could probably enjoy that video, even if you haven't heard the album. But it is a singular experience that we're going to spend a decent amount of time trying to psychologically unpack. And I can't wait.
On the opposite side of the spectrum, we're continuing the 1991 retrospective this week with jazz rap classic seminal album from A Tribe Called Quest. We're talking about the Low End Theory. So we have very different flavors of hip hop we're going to be discussing today on our peripheral episodes. So look forward to those two things. And also, if you haven't checked it out already, we just released our previous episode of the 1991 retrospective on Soundgarden's album Bad Motorfinger. It was a great episode. We had Connor there with us. Fun stuff. Great stuff. So yeah,
we also released a video that I'm very proud of. I'm sure, Jake, you are as well. A discussion of La Dispute's Wildlife, which is, I think, about as deep as we've ever gone into a single record. Like, I can only think of like Talks, Laughing Stock, and maybe Iridescence as being videos where we've gone as deep as we did in this. And Connor was with us for that as well. And it's one of my favorite videos that's ever been uploaded to this channel. I'm incredibly proud of it. So check that out as well if you haven't already. And of course, we also talked about the new Injury Reserve and Thrice records this week. And I'm sure we can hear from Morgan and August when we get into our next segment in a bit in terms of what they felt about that record, since they weren't able to share their feelings with us at the time. So...
And we appreciate the feedback we've been getting from Thrice fans. We had a little bit more discussion than normal. And just in general, videos on this channel have been doing particularly well lately. So we thank you for your attendance. We appreciate it immensely.
Yeah, and we're again continuing to knock on the door of 1,000 subscribers, which is a big milestone for us as well. 15 subscribers away at the current moment. So if you are not already one of the 985 or whatever the number currently is, then please consider joining us. And it would mean a lot to us. And we're very it's going to be a big celebration when we do hit that milestone. So yeah, it'd be amazing if you could be part of the team that helps us get us there. But even regardless, we thank you for watching, and we're going to get straight into, as we normally do, our opening segment, which is the What We've Been Listening To segment, where we discuss music that we've been listening to in the last 7 days, or in the case of Morgan and August, whatever period of time you want to cover. Jake, what have you been listening to recently?
Well, to integrate it into future content of both podcast and peripheral varieties, and to just discuss something very, very big that's happening, I have been listening to the new single from the collaborative record, the new supergroup that now features Converge, Chelsea Wolfe, and a member of
Cave-In and Mutoid Man.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
Well, I mean, the front man, I believe, of those bands.
Yeah, I think so. Their collaborative album, Blood Moon, the first song came out from that, the intro, and Oh my God. I mean, it's like someone designed something in a laboratory to be like, all right, we're going to distill the essence of Jake core. And it's just like fucking gothic Converge with Chelsea Wolfe as the front woman. And it's also doom metal. Fuck.
As someone who really loves when Converge go like long form with their tracks, like I love their like 2-minute rages and stuff, but when they like really settle in for something grimy and dark and oppressive, it's usually really, really good. And what I love about this new single is that it's very recognizably Converge, but it's also like so much, it's also like so different even for them. Like it's a new kind of intensity that obviously Chelsea adds a huge amount to. So, I mean, this album has all the hallmarks of yet another great record from both of them. So, I mean, it's definitely on our horizons for when it comes out.
I pre-ordered the vinyl because frankly, I trust those artists with my very soul. So yeah, sure. Like you, Tyler even said, like when the announcement came out, he tweeted that was like, fucking, this is like if PJ Harvey and Radiohead collaborated to make an album. And it's like, yeah, this is basically the vat of heavy music.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and like specifically those two artists in like 2003, 2004, like
God, yeah.
Just at the absolute peak. Not like either of them went downhill really, but
no,
you know what I fucking mean.
I know what you mean. But yeah, the single is a fantastic song, and I'm looking forward to all of the ways they could potentially surprise me and explore the sound. I mean, it's just absolutely totally here for it. But in that vein, I don't want to talk about just a single because we're going to talk about that, of course, when we cover the album. But I am going through the records of Miss Chelsea Wolfe to prepare for this, just because I've already kind of gotten into Converge. I've done a tier list for Converge. Check that out. You know, you have a little idea of where I'm coming from that sort of discography. But Chelsea Wolfe's music is like foundational for me as like a music fan. She was one of the artists that I think Morgan and I first really bonded over, like getting into when we first met. So like she's like a really big artist for me. So I went back and I listened to my two favorite records from her because I'm also going to be putting together a worst to best that is updated. I already made one a long time ago in the past, but there have been new albums and my thoughts on some of her records have changed. That is to say, I think perhaps my favorite might have changed, and I won't spoil what it is, but my two sort of like god tier Chelsea albums are her record 2014, I believe, record Apokalypsis, and her 2017 album is Spun. 2017, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, those two albums are my favorite of hers, and honestly, they are a great set of albums to show someone what a like diverse artist she really is, because you have Apokalypsis, which is this insanely intense gothic folk music that's got this really heavy emphasis on atmosphere. There are songs like The Wasteland on that album that are just pure 100% gothic ephemera, and it's fucking amazing. And it also just kind of goes hard. There are songs like Demons that are just absolute barn burners. And then there's the closing track on that album, which is, I think, entirely instrumental, called To the Forest Towards the Sea, which I can't describe to you in normal terms because it is simply something I have never heard any other music sound like. It basically sounds like whatever you would do to distill H.P. Lovecraft into music. You just listen to that and you're just like, I am seeing something I should not be seeing, or hearing something that you shouldn't. The whole album just kind of sounds like it's possessed and evil. And if that album sounds possessed, then his Spun, Jesus fucking Christ. That is first notable because this new album is not the first time that Converge and Chelsea Wolfe would have teamed up, technically, because Kurt Ballou did the recording for his Spun, which is notably the heaviest direction Chelsea's gone in. It's a just pretty much straight doom metal industrial record, and god damn, that's one album where like you really do need to sit along and read the lyrics for that one, partially because they're amazing, and like Chelsea has an incredible vocabulary. I remember reading lyrics to that album and I just was like, I literally don't know what that fucking word means. but there's also just fucking harrowing stuff on that album. Most notably, there is a song, I think it might be specifically the closer, which is aptly titled Scrape.
I know.
Which is about as brutal as you can imagine. But I didn't know that there was a basis for reality in the fact that the song is actually about her great grandfather. Woo!
Yeah,
wow.
Leave it there and people can discover that.
Nope.
That's
I'm
my
not gonna
favorite
say...
Chelsea Wolfe record, and I think her most thrilling and impressive in terms of just sheer musical bravura. And obviously I want to shout out Ben Chisholm as well, her longtime collaborator, who's a big part of why that record and a lot of her music sounds the way it does. And he, of course, is on the upcoming collaborative project as well. But yeah, his Spun, and also I think it's her biggest, but I'll also shout out Abyss as well, because I really love that record too.
Abyss is like, that's the quintessential Chelsea Wolfe album to me. That's the one that I feel like I would most commonly recommend people, because it's like, it contains the most like multitudes of her sound. There's also Pain is Beauty, which I think is a little bit more like very forwardly experimental and electronic, but it's not as like, it's a little bit weirder and a little bit more like inconsistent, even though I pretty much love that record front to back. It contains some of her best songs, but that's like the album that I feel like you should listen to after you have some familiarity with her. But yeah, his Spun is an amazing album. It's devastatingly heavy and just an absolute fucking knocker. It's terrific. But also Apokalypsis, give that record some love if that sounds even vaguely interesting, because that's an album that also just doesn't quite get the attention that her other ones do. But I will be updating my thoughts onto that as I go along. And other than that, this week I've listened to, for those of you who don't know, I've shouted it out before, technically, specifically, Rina Sawayama's cover of Enter Sandman, but the Metallica Blacklist is this enormous album of Metallica covers by like every artist under the fucking sun who's making music now. And I've listened to around half of it, just because realistically, I think sitting down and listening to all of that is kind of an exercise in futility, frankly.
You have to really, really love the Black Album.
As discussed on our Metallica episode, we don't really love the Black Album, even though we're broadly positive on it. But you know, if there are songs on there that you like, it's definitely worth checking out, in the sense of like just seeing other artists take a stab at like what they do. Or if there are songs that you don't like on that album, some of them are changed to the point where you could enjoy them. On the opposite end, well, on two opposite end of the spectrums, I mentioned Rina Sawayama, like her objective improvement of Enter Sandman, and then Weezer's cover of Enter Sandman, which is literally just, hey, imagine what it would sound like if Weezer covered Enter Sandman. That's what that song sounds like. Congratulations. It's that. They changed literally fucking nothing. Great job, Rivers. You've done it once again. Fucking impeccable.
And Rivers Cuomo is no James Hetfield. He can't do the goofy. He can't capture the goofiness that song has. Like
the charm is just
destroy
lost.
My Sandman.
I mean, it's just like, I can tie in two things here. I will say, I'm not the biggest fan of their contribution to it. Is that Ghost, one of my favorite bands, covered Enter Sandman, and it's an okay cover. It's definitely, I like it a little bit more than I do the original version, but in terms of like, just I kind of feel like they could have taken things a little bit farther and changed more. But on that note, Ghost also released a new fucking single, a new song for the new Halloween movie. Tie into that, I'm really looking forward to see if that's actually featured within the film, because if it is, then yes. But that song is awesome. It's literally just like Ghost being like, okay, what if we were more like ABBA, but the guitars were even heavier than they were before? And I'm like, yes, exactly. This is what you should always do. And that song is catchy and big and fun and goofy, and I love it. It's some of their best material they've cranked out in a while. But you know, their Enter Sandman cover, it's fine. Other highlights of the Blacklist are definitely Jason Isbell and the 400 Units cover of Sad But True.
I love that cover. It's so good.
Great. Whole hog on the Americana sound, and it's still like really aggressive. Another low light would be the Sad But True cover by Royal Blood,
Oh,
which
dear.
sounds exactly as bad as you would expect that to, which as to say it sounds like it's drowned in fucking Germex. Saint Vincent actually has an okay cover of Sad But True. I'm okay with that one. We've been a little mixed on her on this podcast, but I want to throw that out there.
That sent a fucking shiver down my spine.
Other notable things, Pup did a cover of Holier Than Thou, pretty decent stuff, really, really heavy, like you would expect and want. Corey Taylor does a cover of Holier Than Thou as well, which is also just ballistic and fun. There's also fucking Cage the Elephant doing The Unforgiven, which is very, very good. And also Moses Sumney doing The Unforgiven. He had an album last year, I think it was last year or the year before last.
It was last year, Grey.
Grey, which is really, really good. A really interesting combination of like so many different genres and like R&B and shit. It's like really worth your time if you haven't heard it. But his cover of The Unforgiven is also in that same vein, very fucking strange. Same goes for Wherever I May Roam by the Neptunes.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Nothing Else Matters by Phoebe Bridgers, notably. That was mixed and mastered by Sean Everett. I actually really like it. It's a really, she turns it into a piano ballad. Sounds like Phoebe Bridgers. It's not exactly something that's going to change.
Do we have a sign? Do we have a Phoebe sign?
Oh, we definitely need a Phoebe sign from now on.
Yeah, we do.
My almost namesake Darius Rucker also covers Nothing Else Matters, regrettably, which is not good. And notable worst song that I've listened to on this album, I will say Kamasi Washington does My Friend of Misery, which is really, 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 really good. That said, the worst song on here, one of the worst songs I've heard all year. Who else could it be but Idols covering The God That Failed? Oh my God, every single part of this song is just the most misguided it could possibly be. Can you imagine for a moment Joe Talbot in his most parodic delivery singing a song about the anguishing death of James Hetfield's mom to cancer and the rigorous plight that he had to go through watching his mother refuse treatment for this illness because of her faith in God? And it sounds like Never Fight a Man with a Perm. Man,
I'm now
shut up.
imagining the nightmare inverse of that, which is James Hetfield covering June off of
his delivery on the View, it's like him on The View on Lulu, but like I am the table. Baby shoes never worn.
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, that's an interesting little project.
I'm so sorry I said that. Morgan's in recovery.
He's in pain. It's okay, Morgan. I understand. It's fine. The last thing I'll mention here, I did also re-listen to Pain is Beauty, which is what informed my thoughts earlier, but a thing that I will probably talk a little bit more about when we get to the Record Club episode today, but I listened to, just because we were talking about this very, very like enthused, either last night or the night before last, I don't even remember at this point, it's lost to time, but I listened to the first album from DC Talk, Toby Mac's collective that he belonged to before he was a solo artist back in the late 80s and early 90s. And their first album, we're going to have a lot of interesting thoughts on Welcome to Diverse City. And I'm sure, even if they are broadly immensely negative, I have no qualms, however, about saying that the first DC Talk album is fucking garbage.
This is not New Thing, right? This is, or is it New Thing?
No, it's the album with is that the album title or is that a song on it? I don't even fucking remember.
I looked this up. New Thing is the album with I Love Rap Music on it.
It's New Thing. It's basically the I Love Rap Music, which is the song that I sent to August and everybody else in the chat just to discover how bewilderingly terrible it was. It's basically like, imagine Vanilla Ice rapping over instrumentals that sound like the intro to bad 80s sitcoms, and also if it was infused with Christian gospel, but like like really, really bad Christian gospel, because like Christian gospel can be good, you know. I'm not gonna be like, you know, why, I'm gonna try to be fair, but
I prefer Buddhist gospel myself.
Sure.
What are you saying?
Cool. There's no in-depth thoughts I can give about this, but we have tossed around the idea of like developing like a separate show or just like a bonus like episode of something to talk about contemporary Christian music, along with Connor, because he's somebody who also listened to a lot of the same music, and with August, just because it's obviously August is basically the most diametrically opposed human being I could possibly think of that could listen to contemporary Christian music.
That's a polite way of saying you think that August sometimes enjoys absolutely shit records.
I mean, look, that wasn't what I was getting at, but you're still not wrong. That's why I sent him the song. But the thing about it is that like Welcome to Diverse City, for all of its bewildering choices, has a lot of interesting things in it. The DC Talk, however, shit, which I was like really concerned, because I was just like, is all their music this bad? And then I listened to their later albums, which honest to God are a lot more palatable, just because they sound a lot more like what they were doing on Welcome to Diverse City and stuff, and their production is a lot less dated. Their lyricism is notably a hell of a lot better, but like, oh my God, it's so bad. It sounds like gentrified Run DMC. It's so bad. You're right there, Tyler.
I need a minute.
You're just like, you're selling me so hard. I need to hear this.
August
this
is just like, give
so
me
good.
a reason not to listen to this.
For real, like this sounds so fucking good. But I suppose I should talk about the things I've been listening to these past 2 weeks. So, you know, I was in a post-rock mood doing some homework. I was like, Godspeed you. I was like, you know what? I should listen to a Godspeed album, something I haven't heard. So naturally, I listened to the Mount Silver Zion's album, Born into Trouble as the Sparks Fly Upward. And this album is pretty good. It would be great if it removed approximately all of the samples of like people talking, which is the most inane, horrendous shit on this album. It kneecaps so many interesting song progressions and ideas, where it genuinely took me out of the experience so much, because so much of the album is these really sweeping, epic, Godspeed-esque, you know, progressions, because it's like basically the same band with some member changes, but Ephraim still is like lead guitar and the man at the center of it. And yeah, a lot of this album I do really like. I think there's some just absolutely fantastic moments on it. The first track in particular, masterful. Another thing from one of my favorite progressive metal bands ever, Cynic. I listened to their EP, Carbon-Based Anatomy. This was also it's a good EP, but it is also a mixed bag of an EP, because there are 3 great progressive metal songs. One of them, Bag of Bones or Box of Bones, that's one of my favorite songs of theirs. That's like a top 2-3 track from them. And then there's a bunch of ambient pieces on it which don't really go anywhere, unfortunately. Yeah. You're kind of just waiting for the songs. And the songs are great, don't get me wrong. They're like as good as some of the best stuff on Traced in Air, which incidentally is like one of my favorite albums ever. It's awesome, very good. But then, yeah, just having to literally slog through just nothing songs to get to the real songs I want to listen to does make for a bit of an unfortunate EP experience, but I can always just delete those from my library and to listen to the songs. Another thing, a classic from the childhood of one Mr. Tyler.
Yes.
Future World from the band Trans Am.
I avoided talking about this last week when you weren't here because I wanted to wait until you were here to talk about your feelings on this.
Yeah, because I personally rather enjoyed this. I found a lot of the drumming is ridiculously exciting. This record is taking a lot from like Kraftwerk in terms of what it's going for, but it's like also fusing that with like Lightning Bolt, and it's the dopest shit.
It's like a mixture of like experimental rock and with shades of krautrock like Kraftwerk and Noid, and also like this real electronic edge as well that adds this really like cool flavor to it.
It's called Future World by the band Trans Am. What particularly intrigued me to this band was that I know John Theodore had some collaborations with them. I didn't get to listen to that part of their discography. I listened to this kind of because it was their most popular work. It certainly has a much better first half than it has a second half.
Absolutely.
The first like 5 songs on here, 5-6 songs or so are very good. And then like
the closer is really good as well. I really like the last song.
Yeah, I like the last one too.
The last song is like what really surprised me listening to this again, because I hadn't heard this record since I was a little kid. And the one song that I like have burned into my brain is the title track, which I think is still the best thing on this record, and an absolutely fantastic fusion of electronic synth work and like math rock drumming, and it's like awesome shit. But what really surprised me is how like diverse the sounds on this record are. Like that closing track, Sad and Young, is a Mogwai song. Like it's just Mogwai, like straight Mogwai, and yet they do it in a way where it's of a piece with the vibe they're going for in the rest of the record. So there's lots of curious influences and sounds on this album. It's very unique. Like if you listen to this, you'll be like, okay, I definitely haven't heard anything like this before.
The downside is there's like tracks 7 through 9, Runners Standing Still, Future World 2, and Posistron are different shades of forgettable, or it's like something where I'm very reluctant to say I think it's great, because the best moments on it are unquestionably like amazing. It's just there are a lot of parts of it that are very flawed and noticeably so.
But it is worth it though for the best parts. I definitely would recommend it all regardless. That this is my dad absolutely loves this record. He has it on CD, and it was a big sort of rotation thing growing up, but it was mostly the title track that my dad played a lot because just so fucking good drumming and just grooves and
that buzzing synth it's so memorable.
100%.
That song's amazing. Next thing, so from a one Mr. Prince and the Revolution, I listened. I got around to Purple Rain. It's like a classic beyond a classic, and when I first listened to this, I was like, oh, this is so corny, this is so dated sounding. But then it just kept worming its way back into my mind to the point where I listened to it like 4 times a day for like 3 days straight. And I mean, Prince is just an beyond sexy front like presence on this album.
At times like terribly intimidating in his like sexuality.
And it's like so hooky, so memorable. There were a couple moments on it. There were like 1 or 2 songs I wasn't crazy about. I didn't think Computer Blue was fantastic. And
shame.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Okay. But no, I mean, but like the closer title track, Purple Rain, is just that's one of my favorite fucking songs ever. I love that.
So good.
Huge guitar solo closer where it just becomes these massive and it's like this, and you get this all out of a synth punk album where it gets
So
like
good.
heavy metal heavy at
Yep.
random points.
Well, this is it, August. Welcome to the world of Prince, because it is not limited to just this album. But it's a great introduction. This was my intro to Prince as well. And I can still remember it
Same.
clear as day. The first time I heard this album, I think it was specifically the song The Beautiful Ones, where I was just kind of like, holy shit. I was like, what the fuck is this human being? Like, what is the what am I hearing?
This is a man who like he makes his ephemeral squeals sound sexy.
Like, the man screams. The man has the best scream in all of music. Like, he's just able to do
It's because
these
it sounds melodic.
yeah, he's able to do these really like extreme things with his voice, and they're always amazing. And his entire run throughout everything he put out in the 80s is various shades of fantastic. I mean, my personal favorite is probably Sign of the Times, which I know is like a real sort of like obvious pick because everyone loves that album, but also like 1999
He's got like
as well.
4 of those though, you know, like
Yeah.
there's like Purple Rain, Sign of the Times, 1999, and
Dirty
even
Mind.
like Dirty Mind. Yeah, exactly.
Fun fact that I figured out just noodling not long ago on the guitar is that Purple Rain is played with basically the same chords and the same key as the Star Sailor cut of Song to the Siren.
Oh wow.
Holy
I'm gonna have
shit.
to go and listen to them back
Yes.
to back. Holy shit.
They're both just really horny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Morgan, have you been listening to anything?
Yeah, go ahead and start with the album. The new releases covered last week.
Oh yeah.
I thought the Injury Reserve album was excellent. Not quite as over the moon for it as the website of Rate Your Music seems to be. But the thing is, I get why they are, and
Yeah.
I definitely share in the spirit to some degree. I just don't think it's as consistent as that sort of hype would imply. But the highs are absolutely like, oh, okay, this is, yeah, okay. And the Thrice record, I enjoyed that a fair bit. I don't really have strong feelings on it. Probably won't return to it very much outside of a couple songs. But really at this point after Palms, I still just needed to know that this band still had a pulse. And
Yeah.
it's there, and that pleases me greatly. And it's also like, band has like 11 albums now or something like that. I'm pretty cool if they just hit around the 6 or 7 out of 10 range from now on. You know, I have what I need from them. I don't think, I mean, just so long as it's good, I will not be horrifically disappointed.
I've still been listening to that first song on the record even since we reviewed it. I still really love that song. And I went back to, I'll get into it in a minute.
Okay. Oh shit, I never got a chance to talk about Tim Hecker, who I listened to Harmony and Ultraviolet not long ago. I still haven't rated that album or anything, just because I keep putting it on while I'm reading, and I kind of it makes it a little bit more difficult to evaluate. But it's flooring throughout, so you know there's no indecision involved there. I just have to,
Parse through it.
know. Yes. What else? Well, the big thing that I listened to this week was the Dismemberment Plans Emergency and I, partially as a preemptive. I'm probably gonna need some time with this fucker, so might as well get on it now for the record club. And week after next, is that?
It's in a few weeks' time, I think. I'm not sure exactly when, but we are going to be doing that. That's a, I guess, early announcement for our listeners that is in the pipeline.
Yep.
So yeah, that'll be a thing.
Yeah.
Since you've been gone.
Well, I have also been listening to Emergency and I this week quite a bit, actually.
Shocking.
I mean, that's an album that's been in my life since I was like a fucking 15 years old. So I go through cycles with it like I do with a lot of those classics. But I mean, lately it's just been hitting harder than ever. I had a very particular experience with it this week where I went to go into the city before early, like really early in the morning, like before the sun had come up. And I decided to put on Emergency and I, and it's like a roughly 40-minute bus ride. And so like perfect for like a general most albums. And so by the time, so I put it on and I just, there's something about that record and like public transit and just kind of like being in this like metallic box of neon lights, it's surrounded by like a city of like, you know, neon and blinking just shapes in the darkness, and just being completely alone and listening to that record and, you know, quietly trying not to weep when like a Spider in the Snow comes on, or, you know, that's the
one.
That's the hit. That's the way to experience it. And that's how sad is that. But like, so I listened to it like that. And then when I got to where I was going to the university, I got off the bus and then I walked down the lake that goes through the university to get to the building where I work. And as I was doing that, the sun was coming over the hills in the back of my city, and back and forth. The last song on that record was playing, and it was like, it was like sublime. It was one of those like incredible moments that I hadn't planned, but like you just kind of like stop when you're walking and just like take it in. And yeah, and I listened to it a few more times since then this week as well, and I put it into my top 10 favorite albums, which was, you know, felt inevitable. It's always been really, really high up, but it really felt like it deserved the push this week. So yeah, it's been a real Emergency and I type of week. When is it not?
What you have described there is something that I think every dismemberment plan fan has to go through as a sort of christening. Just being bathed in the morning light while sobbing your eyes out. It's a beautiful time.
I've actually had a number of experiences listening to Emergency and I in like vehicles for some reason. Like it's like OK Computer as well as a record that I associate with like being in some kind of vehicle. Or like
I was going to bring that up because you compare the two a lot as being like the totemic achievements of that particular like year in your eyes.
And an earlier experience this year that basically sums up how this year has been for me is like sitting in the McDonald's drive-thru at 10 p.m. listening to The City.
Yeah.
And that was like a moment where I just caught myself.
I'm loving it.
Dude, I was
in
at McDonald's
McPain.
coming home from third shift last week, and Let Down came on, and I was just like,
I want to McDie. But anyway, so yeah, so that's I mean, yeah, what else is there to say? But following the reaction to and the positive response to our video on Thrice last week, as Jake said earlier, we were thrilled to get so much response and engagement from people on the Thrice subreddit who checked out our video and left really extensive comments as well. I want to take a moment to just thank them again for doing that. Like, we really appreciate the fact that not only these people,
especially considering we weren't charitable to the album
not only considering the fact, not only just because these people sat down and watched our discussion, but also decided it was worth writing these really lengthy comments. And yeah, we were pretty middling on the record overall, and it was a subreddit of people who were generally pretty positive on it. So they offered some good perspectives, and it had me thinking, oh, maybe we could have talked a little bit more about songs like Scavengers, for instance. But I also went back and listened to a different record from Thrice, one that I had heard before, but that I wanted to revisit with a fresh set of ears and with a kind of clearer, I guess, picture of how they've developed. And that is the seminal record Vihisu that we had reviewed in the early days of our Record Club series. And I am proud to say that I like that record even more than I did then. I actually like that record quite a lot now. I bumped it from a 7 to an 8, which I think it thoroughly deserves. And
this is how I win.
Yeah, no, I mean, even before this re-listen, it would probably be the one that I've heard that I would put at the top of the list. But this just cemented that, I think. I'm really just generally impressed with how both hard-hitting and immediate it sounds, but also just how rich it is as well. I think it was something that, just because of the particular style of Thrice, I'm not exactly sure what it was, I've felt a little bit distant from, and that still holds true to some of the other records I've heard from them. Like, I still don't love Artists in the Ambulance as much as I want to, but I am still going to go ahead and listen to some of their other records. Like, I've been, one of our commenters, or I think a couple of our commenters on the Reddit post, strongly recommended that I listen to the Alchemy Index, and said, I think, something to the effect of, how have you not heard it? So I'm like,
That
okay.
commenter is me.
So that's my next step, is to listen to that, and hopefully report back on that. But also, I want to shout out some other things I listened to this week, in the vein of Thrice, another sort of similar sort of band, although I guess a much more sort of indie friendly and more kind of verbose and nerdy band, is I listened to Me Without You, which is a very kind of cool band.
Yeah.
I listened to their album Catch for Us the Foxes, which is one of their most beloved records. And that album was a lot to take in, very dense and lyrically almost impenetrable, but in a way that I found like kind of quite intriguing more than frustrating, although there were certain times where it frustrated me. But a lot of kind of like Christian themes on that record, and very strange literary style, and it was a really like musically fantastic record. I thought, like, it was really engaging, but I was just like kind of so overwhelmed by it. I think I've now heard the first two Me Without You records, and I think I actually currently prefer the debut, A to B Life, I think it's called, slightly more. But I have a feeling that Catch for Us the Foxes is a kind of like record that's so dense and full of like secrets that it'll sneak up on me if I give it the time to do so. And so I plan to do that. Another thing
I should do the same, honestly, because I've always tried to get into that band, and like it's like how you were with Thrice for a little while, where it's just like, boy, this is sure a 6 and 7 out of 10 band, all right. And I'm just like, I feel like this band has a Me album in there somewhere. I just haven't found it yet.
Possibly, like that seems to be a really consistently high rated discography, and I know that Connor loves this band, like loves them. So I'm sure that maybe some discussions with him will make me understand that record. I probably should talk to him about it, actually, because he'd probably be able to help me figure out what the heck is going on. But yeah, another thing I want to shout out that I was pleased to get a chance to listen to is continuing my dive into the dense and strange discography of one Venetian Snares with Aaron Funk's album Winter in the Belly of a Snake, which is the strangest and darkest album that I've heard from Venetian Snares, which is saying something, considering, you know, I famously talked about how they had an album about child murder on
in
their discography, which is so, like, I guess that album is more, I guess, sonically dark and intense in terms of like abrasion and like violence, whereas Winter in the Belly of a Snake is dark in a different way. It's dark in a way that it's much moodier. It's not a very aggressive album at all. In fact, there's a lot of negative space and ambience in this record. Very little of like the traditional breakcore that you would expect from Venetian Snares. It's an album that he made directly in the aftermath of his father's death. And it opens with a song called Dad, where he sings to his dead father over this really eerie instrumental. And it's very uncomfortable and very affecting in equal measure. It feels like something I shouldn't be hearing every time I listen to it. And I found it profoundly upsetting in a positive way. And then the rest of the record is similar. It doesn't get to that level of, uncomfortable directness, but that goes through these very moody shifts and phases. And parts of it, I think, will alienate some people who are looking for, I guess, music with more conventional structure or more to grab onto. It's the closest that I think Venetian Snares has sounded like Autechre, but it's still like very different to Autechre or any other sort of electronic act from around this time. It's a very strange album, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to spending more time with it. It's not a record that I love as much as, say, the Chocolate Wheelchair album or Songs About My Cats, but it's still a record that I feel like has the potential to grow on me. And where, against my better instincts. I found myself really enjoying the moments of that record that seemed to be like less well rated or more kind of ponderous on the surface. They just kind of really enraptured me. So yeah, if you've heard some Venetian snares, it's definitely not the place I'd recommend starting with Venetian snares. But if you have heard some Venetian snares and you want to hear something a bit weirder and stranger from Aaron Funk, then I recommend that. But I'll also take this opportunity to say, if you haven't heard the Chocolate Wheelchair album, listen to the Chocolate Wheelchair album. That shit knocks. What else did I listen to? I listened to Devin Townsend's Epic Loud, which is a record that I've actually been looking forward to for a while in terms of my Devin Townsend Discog deep dive, because it has the second more famous version of Kingdom on it, which is a song that is like very iconic and that a lot of people know Devin for. And that is absolutely one of Devon's best songs. Like, it's just like, as soon as it comes in, it's like overwhelming and euphoric in the way that all the best music on Devon's best records is. But also there's a lot of other strange stuff on that record too that I really love. There we go. We got a sign. Beautiful. There's a lot of other stuff on that record that I really love too, like the synth pop jam. I forget what it's called, that comes immediately before that. There's like real strange experimentation from Devon that I really, really enjoyed. There's one track I think called Grace where he has this gospel choir and these progressive metal like riffs together, and it's like the most fucking bass shit that you've ever heard. It's one of the more, I guess, carefree. I also really fond of, even though it's kind of bad, but I kind of love it, the song Lucky Animals. Animals, and we're lucky. It's like ridiculous.
It sucks.
It kind of does, but I really enjoy it. Like, and I don't mean that in a condescending way. I really like it. But it's only because like I can see, I know Devon's mind now, and I know that his tongue is like so far in his cheek, it's penetrated the skin when he's doing a song like that. So he gets away with it in my book. But yeah, next up on my Devon list is Casualties of Cool. So I'm planning on listening to that very soon, and I look forward to reporting on that as well. I also have two more things to shout out. One I want to shout out is I'm continuing my deep dive through the discography of Mastodon. I listened to Blood Mountain this week, which is a ferocious album, as you would expect from Mastodon. I found myself struggling to like grip it the way that I was able to do with Remission and Leviathan so quickly, because it's just such a I don't quite have a handle on it as instantly as I do with those other two records, and it's a bit longer as well, so it takes a bit more out of you. And I think there are some moments as well where, compared to those earlier records, it's a little on the samey side, but there's also a lot of, that classic Mastodon technicality in there that's undeniable. And again, this seems to be a theme in this segment this week with the Me Without You record as well. But I feel like the more time I spend with this, the more I'll get it, because I just can tell there's a lot happening in this album. And you just kind of, the first time you listen to any Mastodon record, it has to be just the absorbing listen, like the listen where you just take it in, because you can't expect to be decoded. Like the first time I listened to Leviathan, I was like trying to take it in, also like reading the lyrics and stuff and trying to integrate it, and I had to listen to that record twice because it's just you can't absorb everything Mastodon do in one hit. So I'm going to listen to Blood Mountain again, and eventually I'm going to get to Crack the Sky, which I'm very much looking forward to, because I've heard really great things about that record in particular. So there's that. And the last thing I want to shout out is that yesterday I listened to The Roots' Things Fall Apart for the first time in a very long time. The Roots, for my money, have I've only heard their 90s stuff, and I'm actually going to do a full dive into their 2000 stuff, since I've heard their whole career is just fantastic from front to back. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But Things Fall Apart is undeniably a classic. It is an absolutely ballistic record, but also like a chill, vibey record as well. Like it's a record that's very kind of like atmospheric and catchy and really just like immediate and fun, but but also like Black Thought as a rapper is just like such a technical, intense performer that he's like barraging through every single song, and it makes for music that is never less than totally compelling, even though their albums are, as August has said, 2 hours long, which is a beautiful exaggeration, but I mean, not entirely untrue. My favorite Roots record so far is Illadelph Half-Life, which is the record they put out immediately before that, and that is like 80 minutes, and it's 80 minutes, no skips, classic song after classic song. So either of those two records, I personally would recommend Illadelph Half-Life over Things Fall Apart. I think it's narrowly a better record and one that doesn't get as much love, but we're talking fine margins here. These are both absolutely amazing records that have classic songs on them. And I mean, one day we're going to talk about the Roots. I think I'm going to wait until I've heard their discography to figure out which one would be the best one for a record club. But man, between those two records, Illadelph Half-Life and Things Fall Apart, they're already like in all-timer rap group territory for me. And I'm sure that I'll only get more confident in that the more that I hear from them. And yeah, that's basically been my week. On that note, let's move to our first major review of the day, which is it has not really been that long since Sufjan Stevens released his latest opus that he now seems to be on a trend of releasing every 5 years, that being 2020's divisive and dispiriting The Ascension, which is a record.
And if you want to get technical, it's his second major album release of this year with his Convocations project.
Yeah. I mean, Sufjan's always working on some kind of side project, and the way that people think about his discography in terms of like his studio albums as being like the big main events, and then all this other stuff that he does, which is ostensibly also studio albums as side projects, is really kind of curious and speaks to, I think, the way that he operates and the way that people compartmentalize his music based on certain aspects of it. And so
Steven Wilson of contemporary folk, if you will.
Yeah. And so the thing is, like, a lot of people were disappointed with The Ascension. I count myself as one of the few who absolutely wasn't, and finds that record to be, to this day, a stunning achievement and one of his most impressive from front to back. But I definitely take that is not an opinion that is widely shared. And so that's put, I guess, Sufjan won't give a shit about any of this, but that's what's put, I guess, the internet or the world of music fandom in a strange position in anticipating his next thing, especially on the back of the Convocations project, which, in case you don't know, is this like multi-hour ambient thing that he did in memory of his father, I believe.
And I did listen to a bit of it in preparation for this review, just particularly to give some context on that project itself.
How'd you find it? No one I know's heard it.
It was very forgettable and very it feels like a project that is essentially like he had longer ambient pieces and then had to make radio edits of them.
He did that with something like that with the sort of low-key record he made with his stepfather early last year called Aporia as well.
Yeah.
Which equally kind of landed with a bit of a thud. And so the place that Sufjan's been in, and I guess the public consciousness, is a kind of a place of a downturn in his creative quality output wise. And even though I disagree with that, I think that the general consensus is more important to take into account, and that's where it's at. And so there's a lot of sort of anticipation for this particular project, especially on the basis of the singles that were released, songs like Reach Out and songs like Sumerian Shade and songs like Back to Oz, songs that were pretty universally well received by fans of Sufjan, who I think were kind of relieved to hear a return to, I guess, a more organic sound from him, because I think one of the themes of the Sufjan discourse over the past couple of years is that people have kind of gotten a little bit of tired of him just working in this electronic mode, and especially with a record like The Ascension, which is dominated by that electronic aesthetic. I mean, if you don't like that record, then you're going to get pretty sick of that aesthetic from Sufjan. And so I think people were like begging for something, for him to kind of return to his roots in a certain sense, return to an earthier sound, bring back the banjos. and just really create these tapestries of warmth. Because that's the other thing about the Ascension, as well as being an 80-minute frigid electronic record. That shit was dark. That shit was paranoid. That shit was really uncomfortable to listen to at certain points. Sufjan was not in a good place, and it was unlike something like the Age of Ours, which is all of those things, but also kind of like frenetically exciting and pulsating and larger than life in a way that people connect with. That record was just kind of really depressed and sad, and really like there was none of that explosiveness, or very little of that explosiveness to it. And so people have been wanting for Sufjan, I think, to return to a place of just, again, giving his music a grand sense of scope and size in the compositions, but also a warmth that has been lacking from a lot of his music that people miss. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why people have really glommed on quickly to this new project that is a collaboration between him and another person called Angelo De Augustine, who is another artist on his record label, Asthmatic Kitty, who he's kind of helped to release his records and has kind of brought him along and collaborated for this project. And so hearing that it would be this very consistently warm and organic and string heavy, but also like banjo all the way and gorgeous vocals and sensuous sort of lyrical approaches that are very kind of flowery, and this kind of concept or conceit of these songs being based on the experiences that Sufjan and Angelo had holding up in a cabin and watching movies and trying to write songs about the characters in those movies. And so that's kind of the grand conceit of it. And people, all of these things to say, people have formed a really strong attachment to, or at least a really quick embrace of this record. It seems to have been universally lauded by Sufjan fans. I haven't seen much about it in mainstream music press, which is curious, I think. I mean, we obviously get very insular within our online music bubble, but yeah, it seems to be hitting it off really well there. But what's interesting about this record is, and I think I can kind of forecast this because I know, is that we all feel about the same about it. And that is to say, we're all kind of a bit underwhelmed with this record. And I think certainly all of those expectations that were set up because of all of those things that I said, probably have contributed to the way that we've consumed this as well. I do think that if this had come at a different point in his career, like if he had done this in, say, the mid 2000s, and it would feel very much of a piece of what he was doing at that time, and another piece of it that we could appreciate. But as a kind of like change in direction, it feels very much like more modest than we would hope from Sufjan in terms of a change of direction, more kind of peered back and less I guess, gripping and immediately grabbing you. Like this is a record that very much consists of songs that have a very, very similar aesthetic palette, where you are both absorbing the rich sounds of these songs, which are very similar from track to track, but also, I guess, ostensibly being made to focus on the songwriting, which I think, the conceit aside, has some limitations as well. And I'll kind of step back there because as the biggest Sufjan fan on the podcast, I can build to my detailed thoughts as we go along. But what do you guys think approaching this record in terms of how you experienced it and what stood out or didn't stand out?
Personally, expectations didn't really factor in for me just because I knew this was something that was coming out, and like I knew it was like a, you know, it's not like a main Sufjan album, but like my expectations for Sufjan are so like I just don't really have, even for his like main stuff, it's just kind of like he's an artist that is so eclectic and so like willing to bow to the whims of like himself that I feel like coming in with any set of expectations is probably just not the best way to engage with it. And like I happen to love some of his peripheral stuff. I own his Planetarium album on vinyl that we did with a collab with a bunch of musicians. So I was like, okay, this could be cool. So, you know, maybe. And like Tyler said, I am broadly very positive about it. The unfortunate reality of the album for me is that the most interesting qualities that it has are its negative ones. There, you can kind of feel the context set up, you know, the whole like desire for Sufjan to maybe go back to a more reserved and kind of humble, I guess, sort of sound, or comparatively for him, sound, you know, that kind of ditches the electronic stuff, which this record mostly does. And honestly, the more and more I think about it and the more and more I listen to this, the more that kind of element sort of frustrated me, because if anything, this album's broadest problem for me is that it just kind of, it, sonically speaking, it's a little samey. It's a little bit just, not even like in and of itself, is that this sounds a lot like earlier Sufjan projects. For me, this sounds a lot like something like Seven Swans, or even something closer to something like Michigan, where he hadn't really gotten to the grander sort of opus stuff yet, like Illinois. And the thing is if Illinois or even Age of Odds era Sufjan made this album, I feel like it might be better, just because the broad sort of concept here, as Tyler alluded to, is that all of these songs are sort of getting at the heart of movies that he's watched, of various different directors. Some of them are foreign films, some of them are movies like Bring It On, then, you know, various films of differing qualities and styles. And sort of like, it seems that he's trying to get to a part of a narrative that maybe he engages with, or a character that he engages with, or even a perspective, like something on Cimmerian Shade, where he seems to adopt the perspective of every character in Silence of the Lambs and sort of find the humanity in them, including that of someone like Hannibal Lecter or Buffalo Bill. And that's kind of what he does on some of the other ones too. And to me anyway, it's with varying levels of success as to whether or not like I either emotionally connect with it or even really like respond to it. In my opinion, the album's standout track is the opener, Reach Out, which I just think is just a very plainly beautiful song. I think it has some of the strongest writing, and it could be perhaps because I'm not actually familiar with the movie that it's based on, but I still find the writing to be some of the most connective. Like, I can sort of understand it without having seen the movie, which is kind of one of the limitations that I have with this too, is that if you haven't seen some of these movies, is that I actually think that the lyrical approach here will hold you at a distance occasionally. And sometimes they just sort of exist in a weird place, like in my opinion, the sort of the lowest point on the album, which it's not a bad song, it's just kind of a woefully underwhelming one, that being the title track, Beginner's Mind, where I don't really understand the point of the song at all, really. Like, I just don't really know what the song is about. I believe the song is the movie in question is Point Break, but like the emotional crux of the song is so like obscured to the point where I'm just kind of like, I don't really know what this song is about. And that kind of happens a couple times where like on songs like This Is the Thing, which humorously The Thing, where there are allusions to things like paranoia and mistrust, but it's a very broad take on the movie that, lyrically speaking, just doesn't really suit Sufjan or Angelo's strengths. But conversely, there are really interesting perspectives that they take, like going notably, You Give Death a Bad Name, which is where Sufjan explores the multiple different perspectives by which the events of Night of the Living Dead happens. He explores it from the perspective of the zombies, from the perspective of the survivors, and from the perspective of the people who were responsible for like the zombie outbreak. And it gets at something that maybe the like an emotional core that, you know, wasn't there in the movie, and that I think is interesting to look at from a perspective like that. And it sort of varies. On a song like Olympus, for example, Olympus and Cimmerian Shade actually both feature him directly alluding to the creators of the movies, like Harryhausen and Demi, and sort of like pleading for them or referencing them in sort of like a metatextual way, which is very interesting, and I like that. And then there are just songs on here that are plainly also just very pretty. Cimmerian Shade also is a very, very pretty, very pleasant song. The closer, Lacrimae, particularly the ending, I found to be very, very enrapturing. And songs that are just very good, like the Mad Max inspired Murder and Crime. That said, you know, there are just as many moments that really, really work. I wouldn't say that they're great, but there are also just as many moments that I'm just sort of a little bit adrift and don't really know what I'm meant to feel, or like I'm trying to process everything. And sometimes it's due to the fact that I think Angelo De Augustine just simply doesn't have the vocal presence that even Sufjan has. Like, not that Sufjan has this super original voice, or that even he like is a voice that like you can immediately recognize, even though I can, just because I've listened to a lot of his fucking music and became such a big fan just because of our podcast, I think. But it's weird just because Angelo just kind of comes onto a track and it's just like, oh, hi, high-pitched Elliott Smith. And then he just kind of comes and goes, and it's like, okay, bye. And there are also times where the monotony of the album and its like sameness aesthetically and sonically is like, it's not the worst problem in the world to have. Like, when you have like sort of a plaintive folk album, you can kind of expect that. And, you know, I still get mileage out of it, even when it's not super sonically interesting. But there are definitely moments where Sufjan like goes for an octave that's a little higher, or mixes his vocals like really, really, really up high, or conversely, really, really, really buried, to the point where I'm just sort of like, I'm either left like looking for the lyrics, or I'm also just kind of like, hey, those are a bit high. Can you like turn that down? It's a little tiny bit annoying. So, you know, I obviously, you know, there's a lot of criticisms I can level at it, but the album as a whole is pleasant. It's nice. It's got a neat little concept that I think is a little bit half-baked, but is still mostly quite enjoyable. I don't think the album's particularly long. It doesn't like fatigue me or anything. I would have just maybe liked to have seen Sufjan come at this with maybe another collaborator who is a little bit different. Like on Planetarium, he's working with people like one of the Desner brothers, who brings something to that album, who you can really identify and be like, wow, this adds something. There's like an alchemical reaction here that I really, really like. And this just sort of seems to be something that feels very safe. I can certainly see why a lot of people might like it. There's totally something here. Your mileage may vary personally, but for me, it was just kind of, this is nice. I like this.
Mhm.
Yeah, safe was definitely a word that entered my head more times than I would have cared for while listening to this. And that is, of course, with the caveat that this has plenty of very good sounding, lush tracks with very gorgeous presentation and very interesting lyrical perspectives. All of this is like positive, but I don't know. I share a lot of thoughts with Jake here, where it's like Angelo De Augustine is not a particularly compelling vocalist on here at all.
He also just sounds a little bit too much like Sufjan at points, where you're just kind of
yeah,
like,
that's the other thing. That's another thing that really bugged me. I was like, is Sufjan like double tracking his own vocals here? What's going on?
if they
But,
harmonized, I genuinely wouldn't be able to tell.
yeah,
There are definitely moments of this record where they harmonize, but it did take me a couple of listens to identify
yeah,
those.
same.
Yep.
That threw me off, and a lot of what helped me was like genius.com telling me
Yep.
when both of them were singing, because otherwise it would have been
Yep.
It would have been a little anonymous, quite frankly, which really does unfortunately defeat the point of having a collaborator, when it just feels like this could have, you could have cut Angelo's name out of here. And I feel if you had just packaged this as a mainstay Sufjan album, a lot of people would probably not notice. Which, like, yeah, it's a fine, good album that does for me a lot of the things my favorite Sufjan albums do. Like, it's very pleasant, it's very tender, it's very warm, but it also just doesn't feel as cutting edge or exciting anymore as his very best work for me. It's not pushing the emotional envelope in a way like Carrie and Lowell or An Age of Odds, where I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating electronic stuff. And those comparisons aren't necessarily fair. I'll readily admit that. It is not
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
even think you need to have like Sufjan cutting edge with the instrumentation or anything. The thing is like, it's low stakes. Like it's obviously a low stakes album. It's obviously an album that's, being presented in this certain way as not a main project, but this, little project thing that he and Angelo have worked on. But there's a kind of sense of a not fully committing to the fullness of what Sufjan would typically realize in all respects, musically, right, in terms of writing, in terms of every aspect of this record. It feels like I'm used to Sufjan really expansively digging into these things, and it feels like
Yeah.
he's kind of done a bit of a half measure on this record to a certain extent.
Yeah, there were definitely, gosh, and there were some lyrical moments like "This Is the Thing" where I felt it was just downright bland, and like I didn't even feel it would have come from Sufjan. It was like, this is just some random flavor of the week singer-songwriter track that did not even need to have a connection to the films associated, which I know, yeah. And like Jake said, a lot of it is just half committal. There's moments like Reach Out or fucking Night of the Living Dead song. That one was cool, where it's like he's doing something interesting, but it's just, yeah, it doesn't take it as far as I'd want it to, for it to be something really memorable. And I mean, as it stands, it's still nice. I just don't think I'm ever going to have a moment where I need to come back to this for any reason,
Yeah, and he is capable of doing stuff like that with his peripheral stuff. Like, again, I'm probably a bigger Planetarium fan than most people on Earth or most people who listen to that music, but like, in my opinion, that's still something that like should be considered as like a significant album with a lot of effort and a lot of like just a whole, basically the commitment you would want from a project like this put into that. So I don't feel like, even though it's not like main Sufjan material, is that I don't feel like it's wrong necessarily to expect him to have that level of quality sort of like up to snuff. I feel like that's a very reasonable expectation to have.
No, I still feel he, like, even if you're not branding this as like the main series, that's no reason to just fuck around, because you are still a musician who has the burden of your fans' expectations, whether that's something you like or not. It's just a reality of being so popular and putting things out in the popular sphere. But I don't know, that's kind of how I felt about this.
Yeah, I really can't put it much better or more concisely myself than either of you. Very nice sounding album, very classic Sufjan sounding stuff. Yeah, I do feel like the writing is weirdly kind of not the draw for Sufjan this time around, which is kind of rare for him.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of feels like you're not left with a whole lot to think about, or it feels like a very passive listen, which is weird for an album that sounds like this.
Yeah, I've always kind of been like, I've come to realize over the years that I'm in a strange position when it comes to understanding what people love about Sufjan. And I say this as a huge Sufjan fan. I understand many of the things that people love about Sufjan and share them, but there are other things that I don't quite get. Like, for example, Sufjan's neuroses and like his deeper insecurities and his real like soul searching stuff, I find to be a lot of his most compelling music. I think very beautifully made into this colossal opus on Age of Ards, and in my opinion, The Ascension too. And yet there's a lot of hardcore Sufjan fans. Like, I know why you guys feel the way you do about that record, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that you're not like huge, amazing Sufjan fans. But why like hardcore Sufjan fans react so with such volatility to that album does confuse me to a certain extent, because it's like, well, what are you not getting? And I understand to some extent, but then there are other parts where I'm like, I don't know this. And I went back and listened to The Ascension this week, and I still fucking love that album. It still has so much of what I love about Sufjan as a personality in it. And I think to talk about this record and why I'm not as in love with this record as I expected to be, like, not even hope to be, but expected to be, the way that things were going. And I want to preface this by saying, I know there's been a lot of, a middling response on this album so far. And if you're a Sufjan fan, that might be disheartening to be listening at this point. But I do have plenty of positive things I am going to say as well. A lot of which will build on some things that Jake's already mentioned as well. But what I will say is I think the root of this particular record and the songwriting style of Sufjan and Angelo, because it should be said that they wrote these songs together. These are not Sufjan songs that Angelo's just on. This was even if it is difficult to tell the difference between the two in certain respects, this is something that it should be said they did together. But I think what this record makes me think about is the Tonya Harding song that Sufjan put out, I think a few years ago, just a solo single. It was a synth pop song. Like, it wasn't really all that, but it had the kind of lush grandeur that this record has, except it was just more electronic. And that is still to this day one of Sufjan's best songs, in my opinion. An absolutely incredible, stellar single where he has like 5 or 6 different verses where he muses on the life of Tonya Harding and the ways in which she is this figure of this misunderstood figure, but also this figure who is undeniably responsible for a lot of her own suffering. And so he has this really complicated musing on her that is not dissimilar to the way that he has mused on certain figures in previous music that he's made. And that type
John
of
Wayne
musing,
Gacy.
I didn't want to make a connection between Tonya Harding and John Wayne Gacy. I didn't want people to think I was comparing them as people. But yes.
I don't think people did. I just wanted to bring it up just because one of my favorite podcast moments is Morgan's Unforgettable. What a guy.
Yeah. But yeah, and also for the record as well, something I can't believe I've forgotten to mention so far, Saoirse and I did a video on Sufjan's discography up to and including Carrie and Lowell. Like, we did it last year, and if you didn't know that or unaware, I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. It's a great video too. We extolled the virtues. We love all of those records, or most of those records, all the ones that most people love. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, so you have this particular style of songwriting that Sufjan has developed where it's kind of like he's both speaking to and speaking from the perspective of this figure, whether it is a historical figure or a figure in fiction. Most notably, the Tonya Harding song was very clearly inspired by the I, Tonya movie, both reflections on that and her actual life outside of that film. And so to me, when I think of this record and what it's doing with the film concept, I think of the Tonya Harding song. And I think you can see a lot of the same sort of style and approach to songwriting on this record. Much has been said of the pleasantness and the lushness of how this sounds, but I do actually have some things to say about the songs themselves and how they're written. I think that, for instance, you have that opening track, Reach Out, which is based on the Wim Wenders film, Wings of Desire, which is a movie I love. And you have some incredibly beautiful and flowery lyricism in here, some quite striking lines as well. Home is where you've called my name. I've gone as far as the eye can blame. I come from conscience where there's no conjugation. I would rather be a flower than the ocean. I would rather be devoured than be broken. And so the thing about the lyricism on this record is that you get these kind of poignant moments where you can see, especially if you're familiar with the film, how the sentiment relates to a feeling that's expressed through the character in the movie. But you also have moments where there is a kind of like distance from the seeming distance from the inspiration and what you're actually hearing expressed lyrically. And I want to be clear about this critique, because I don't think that it's inherently a bad thing that the songs can't necessarily be clearly associated with the movies. I think if you fail to see the association between the song and the film it's based on, I don't think that's inherently a negative thing, because it's fine if the song is just a loose point of inspiration for Sufjan and Angelo to sing about whatever they want that journey puts them onto. But the issue is that some of these songs, and perhaps it's just that I haven't really been able to unpack what's going on in a lot of these songs lyrically, but some of them, the poetry that's expressed is so sort of vague and non-specific and kind of difficult to really connect to emotionally, that I don't have much else to do with it. And I want to stress that I'm really approaching this with a very open mind, as people who watch this podcast know that I do, perhaps to a fault. But there are definitely songs on this record where I think I struggle to get much out of them, even trying to consider how it might relate to the source material. That I think is a minimal number of songs. Like if I were to point numbers specifically, I would say a song I don't particularly care for, Murder and Crime, which feels like it's ostensibly based on Mad Max, but feels like a kind of musing on the state of the world that I don't particularly care for. Where he talks about what the violence is called and the law abiding and murder and crime, and it's like and then the chorus of my love, I don't know why this life is so uncruel and so cruel and unkind, but it weighs on my heart. It's very like, I don't know, it's just I'm used to Sufjan expressing these feelings in ways that are a little sharper or a little more, I guess, oblique than some of the real sort of like high school poetry of songs like that. Which I don't like to say, but unfortunately is the case. I feel,
I mean, it's just very blunt, you know. There's not a lot to like leave for future listens. Like I feel like and I listened to it multiple times, and I did it so with the intent of unpacking it as much as I could. But I almost feel like the album punishes you for that, because once you do, the album kind of loses its luster immediately.
Yeah, and I feel similarly about the song Lost in the World as well, which is again, very pleasant enough instrumentally, although perhaps one of the least compelling, but also just like lyrically, I have no idea what to make of this. It's very jargony in a way that Sufjan has a way of incorporating jargon or like strange esoteric words into his lyricism to add color, but also that is meaningful. It's not just there for the sake of it. Whereas here, when he's saying shit like, an optical indifference, parallel realms of existence, cosmology's apocalypse, your premonition's persistence. I'm like, I have no idea what he's trying to express. It just feels like collage of words. And perhaps that's the point. But then when he goes into the chorus and it's like, yeah, I've been lost in the world, caught in thoughts, daydreaming like I do. It's like, it's like, what? It's so whiplash from shit that makes no sense to stuff that's like so blunt that I have no idea what to do with it.
Fictional California is a really good example of that for me. That song is just, it's kind of like Mad Max, where it's just kind of like, this is like borderline preachy and like just like, oh, have you ever noticed that California be superficial? And it's like, thanks, River Cuomo. Well, like, come on, man.
Actually, I'll count that, because I actually quite like Fictional California. And I think this is one of the songs where I think the connection to the film, Bring It On Again, which hilariously it says in the notes on Genius, is one of Sufjan's 10 favorite films of all time.
That is the least surprising thing I've ever heard.
I do actually feel like you can see the characters in this movie and the allusions to, basketball, and I don't know if I haven't fucking seen it, but cheerleading, yeah.
Look, see, you can, but also those illusions really just don't do anything for me. Like I can totally connect it with the movie. It's just that once the connection is made, I'm just kind of like, oh, okay.
This is fucking literally Bring It On is a basketball. I don't know, I haven't seen it.
Okay, I may have slightly undermined my point there. I'll move on. There are lots of other songs I like more, and I want to get into the because I've kind of thrown at you a bunch of the stuff I don't care for. There's a lot of songs that I really like. I already shouted out Reach Out. I'm also really fond of Back to Oz, which I think is one of the most the actual sort of story of the film, the Return to Oz movie, which I haven't seen again, but I've been made aware of, is apparently quite interesting. Like I'm just going to quote Sufjan himself, who describes this movie as being like a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, where there is no resemblance to the original, where none of the characters resemble the former characters, and the movie has this weirdly dark tone to it that like is just so at odds with The Wizard of Oz. And Sufjan essentially says that he sees it as a movie about child abuse, which has these kind of like real world sort of I guess allusions or indirect, makes you think about the story of Judy Garland and what she experienced and all that sort of thing. And the song itself has the sort of real darkness of the desire to return to Oz, but also the absolute brokenness of the person who can't get what they need from that, who survives their experience but remains afraid. And when he says at the end of the chorus, "Don't be my last call, do you mind that I'm falling apart?" That, to me, the way he sings that, the way that comes off, to me is like that, you get a real feeling, a real glimmer of that classic sort of Sufjan in that. And I think the song musically as well is one of the more grabbing, and again, that chorus melody is really strong, I think. And so I really do like that song quite a bit. And I feel similarly about Olympus as well. I love the musicality of this song, those muted percussive like string thrums. I don't know if it's piano or whatever it is used to make that main melodic tone. It's quite pretty and engaging, and the allusions to the creator of Clash of the Titans and the historical aspects of it are appreciated, and you can get something out of them that allows you to reflect on the story in the film. I think the story, the myth itself more so than the film maybe, but I think it's definitely in there. And I also want to talk about my favorite song on this record, which I think is the most successful at all of the goals of this record in terms of the lush, gorgeous sound and the dense and deep and meaningful lyricism, which is Cimmerian Shade. I think it's the most affecting and thoughtful in its investigation of the character at the center of the film. There's a great statement on the Genius page from Angelo about the thought process when writing this song, which is that, quote, many authors have emotional attachments to the characters they create, but in this instance, I was interested in how a character felt about being created. In my imagination, I was giving consciousness to someone else's creation. This song is essentially a dialogue between the creation and the creator that seeks to find understanding to some of the same questions we ask ourselves about existence, free will, fate, purpose, guidance, and all of those things. And that is quite powerful. And the thing is with the song is I can get that when I listen to it and when I read into it and when I see what they are singing about on this song, particularly the heartbreaking allusions to, the characters in Silence of the Lambs and Buffalo Bill in particular, the ways in which Sufjan and Angelo reflect on the potential problems that have been talked about the way in which that character is portrayed in that movie, and the desire of the character themselves to be saved by their creator. It's really quite powerful, and I think it has a double sort of layer of power when you think about Sufjan's history and the previous songs that he's done writing about these kind of characters. You can imagine this sort of thought process being applied to a song like John Wayne Gacy Jr. And it's almost like this song functions as a kind of response to that song, because that song is about Sufjan telling the story of John Wayne Gacy Jr. and then finding himself in that story. And this song is about actually investigating what the author is doing when they're doing that kind of thing, and whether that is something potentially that could be, I don't know, if not problematic, then at least like fodder for soul searching in a different way. Like, what is it that we see in these characters, and what are we doing when we write about them? And how do characters exist? Like, are they limited to the ways in which their creator wants you to interpret them or wants to paint them? And especially in the case of a film adaptation, like when you have a character who is written by an original author, then a character who is rewritten by a different author, and then played by a certain actor in a certain way, and then directed by a certain director in a certain way. You have all of these interpretations of a single character, and what is the truth, and like what does that say about the character, and how, and is it even possible to know the true character? Is there one like most true, most real interpretation of the character, or are they all equally valid? And what does that say? And so there's a real interesting idea there that I think is powerfully got at, and the song itself is gorgeous. I absolutely love it, and I think, it ends the record ahead of that closing track, which is equally beautiful, but ends the record in a really quite moving place, especially with that outro repeated of "I just want you to love me" with "I just wanted to love myself," and interspersed between. I find that incredibly powerful, especially when you reflect on all of those things that I've said about the song. And there's just a genuine aching sadness in the fixable Jonathan Demme, which out of context is hilarious, a hilarious lyric, but in context is devastating for all of those reasons. And I think it's one of the best songs that Sufjan has written in the last decade, or Angelo, or I don't know to what extent the writing begins and ends with either of those, but whoever wrote it, it's a masterful piece of songwriting. And I wish that I connected to other songs on the record the way that I do with this one. But yeah, this one, Back to Oz and Reach Out, and to a lesser extent, You Give Death a Bad Name as well, which I won't speak on because I think Jake has absolutely nailed why that song is so good as well. But yeah, I think that even though I'm mixed, there's a lot to appreciate here. I get why people are so thrilled with it. Like, it's a very easy record to put on and just listen to and just have as this kind of source of pleasantness. And the lushness is, you know, it is a welcome change of pace for Sufjan at this point. And I would love to see him apply this kind of thing to something more ambitious. And I hate to be the person who says, you know, Sufjan, be more ambitious, because my favorite Sufjan record is Carry On Lol, which is where he pares everything down and pointedly takes you away from that larger than life scope. But yeah, at this point, it feels like he could apply what he's doing here in a way that allows him to explore and expand some of these ideas in a more ambitious way. And I think that it would be great to see that from him next. And yeah, I'm still glad that I listened to it, and I'm still glad that we took the time to review it so I could really think about it and try and unpack it. But yeah, and who knows, maybe I'll start to get more out of these songs as time passes. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think the sort of guiding thesis for me with this is sort of like, there's never a moment where I do not like listening to it, but the album kind of seems like it's constantly in a flux of deciding when it's going to be emotionally interesting and when it's going to be instrumentally interesting, and usually kind of goes back and forth, and then occasionally it will be both at the same time, and those are my favorite songs on the record, and then it'll go to another song where it just kind of picks one. So it's a bit scattershot, but I can never say it's unenjoyable. So, you know, again, mileage may vary. So
okay, well then, favorite tracks and ratings for A Beginner's Mind. Jake, why don't you lead us off?
My three favorite tracks are definitely going to be Reach Out, You Give Death a Bad Name, and Cimmerian Shade. And my least favorite track is the title track, Beginner's Mind, and I give the album a 6.
All right, my three favorite tracks here are Reach Out, Back to Oz. I want to shout out that little horn section in that song, which I quite enjoy.
It's really good.
Yeah. And I guess I'll now throw in Pillar of Souls, maybe. Least favorite, yeah, I'd agree. A Beginner's Mind. And once again, yeah, I'd agree. It's a 6 out of 10.
My three favorites are Reach Out, Cimmerian Shade, and I'll go with the title track. Nothing in particular really leaps out as least favorite. I'll probably say Murder and Crime. And I will also give this a 6.
Okay. My three favorite tracks on this record are Cimmerian Shade, as I said, Back to Oz, and Reach Out. Least favorite track is probably It's Your Own Body and Mind, which I just feel like is such a nothing song. Just doesn't do a thing for me, to the point where I forgot to mention it. And I, once again, am going to give this record a 6, which gives us a mean of 6.
Standard deviation on this one's crazy.
Standard deviation of, wait for it, a goose egg. 0.
I got to admit, I do definitely a little bittersweet that I can't hear Saoirse go, least favorite track. I don't really have one. They're all good.
So let us know what you think of the Sufjan Stevens and Angelo De Augustine album. We'd love to hear different perspectives. Obviously, we've presented a pretty unified front, but we'd love to hear why you love the record, if you love it, or if you agree. That would be awesome as well. Moral support is appreciated. Let us know in the comments below what you think. And that only leaves us to, oh wait, we've got another record to review today.
Yes, we
That's
do.
right. Which is
I love Block Party. Let's talk about that song.
the
So-
disappointment when she put the single Flux out and it wasn't a cover of the Block Party song.
Okay, so because I am 100%, another reason that I am a little bit sad that Saoirse isn't joining us for this particular segment is because I know she is also like me and is a little bit bigger of a fan of One Miss Poppy. Even though I'm far from the devoted stan that a lot of her fan base has accrued, kind of a fan base a lot like someone who I would like, someone like Grimes, I think. Poppy is actually a really interesting musical figure and just internet personality, I think. Started off in the beginning of this decade as really kind of an ARG weird horror thing where she was a YouTube presence that was like supposedly an artificial intelligence, all of this deep internet lore shit, stuff that was really popular, back in the late 2000s and early 2010s internet stuff of like presenting this facade and having all of this lore behind this sort of internet program thing. Like she was this sentient creator. There was like this dark, mysterious organization behind her pulling the strings. And unfortunately, that was actually something that proved to be a little bit truer than being just fiction, as it took a little while for it to happen. But the people who were sort of behind Poppy as a project, there was some drama that we're not completely illuminated on, but basically like they were screwing her over once she actually started coming out with music and becoming like a pop star forwardly, when she actually started making music, which the beginning of her career is really unremarkable. Like those first couple EPs and albums are just, they're like minimal and they show like promise of things that might be like a lingering darkness that could maybe manifest one day. That didn't really happen until she came out with Am I a Girl, which was sort of when she kind of picked up steam, found her musical identity, even though that album's not great. But she released an EP after that called Choke, which I am actually a pretty big fan of. I don't think it's a like incredible project or anything, but it's a couple of songs that are pretty concise and they're all very, very catchy, and they get to the heart of what Poppy is, which is blending this sugary bubblegum Carly Rae Jepsen adjacent pop music with intense, heavy, loud, industrial, heavy metal, Nine Inch Nails, Gojira shit. And it has all this weird thematic stuff and storytelling. Like there is some genuinely fucking bizarre imagery on that Choke EP that alludes to fucking aliens and fucking dystopic worlds and shit, and it's like a science fiction thing. I don't really get into the whole narrative thing. I just think it's interesting to listen to. But then she really, really broke through with I Disagree, which is an album that was sort of the apex of her blending her really, really catchy pop music and her really, really intense heavy metal stuff. And that was an album that, like most people, myself very much included, enjoyed. What wasn't like top 10 album for me that year, but it was one of my most listened to just because it was really easy for me to go back to. She's constantly shifting through these musical identities. She does it pretty well. Sometimes she had, there were riffs that were reminiscent of like Rammstein. There were parts that like where she took like a shoegaze approach to it. It's a very restless,
I still
interesting
get
album.
Just on the note of that, before you move on to the new record, I still get because that when that record came out, like in January of last year, I think, like that was a time where we were like, it was summer for me, and I was listening to heaps of music, and we'd kind of our original sort of friend group chat was booming, and so that record was like being talked about a lot. And I still have I still get that lyric, bury me 6 feet deep, cover me in concrete, turn me into a street, stuck in my head all the time, which is just such a it's such a like metal lyric, but like also just like so over the top.
Yeah, and that's kind of the appeal, is that like she's got like this really, and to her benefit, she was on that album Poppy. It wasn't just like empty music. She had a lot to say about men in the music industry, the way that pop stars are treated. It's this very like meta, self-conscious thing, but you can tell it's actually coming from a place of personal experience. So that project created a bit of promise. People kind of got on board with her a little bit more, and that brings us today to Flux. And it's been, alluded to by Tyler and August. Oh, how could we forget about such a thing? But they like, or Tyler didn't particularly care for. I disagree. So you might be wondering.
I liked it. It was like I just felt bad for not liking it more. But
okay, fair enough.
I dug that most
as somebody who is a fan of her last couple projects and the direction she's taken, you might be interested to know what someone who's has a bit more affinity for it. And this album sucks. It's awful. I hate it. It's really bad. I really don't know how to just like, I don't know how I can like put this or like, I just gotta lay it all out here. I fucking hate this thing. It was insufferable. I hate all 32 minutes of it. I think there's one good song on here and it's like fine, and it's the closer, and it's because it's the most traditionally sounding her thing, which is another problem because it's still something she's done before. And that's a huge complaint I have with this album, is that thematically and lyrically, this shit is so fucking vacuous and annoying. Like it's just all the same shit she did on her last two albums, less interesting, more like, this is some Lamb of God blunt lyricism here with how just like, okay, I get it. Most prominently featured on the terrifically catchy So Mean, which is just like, hey, do you ever I'm a bad I'm a bad bitch because people were mean to me, so now I'm gonna be mean to them. Oh, I'm so angsty. And it's like, I don't fucking care. And you know what? Look, as I said with the Lamb of God album, is that it's like that album was heavy and the vocalist sounded like Cookie Monster. I didn't give a flying fuck about those lyrics. I was just like, yo, this shit kind of goes and I like it. This shit, on the other hand, this does not go. What the fuck is this? I don't know what genre this is trying to be. And perfectly honest with you, I don't particularly care, because all of it is clunky and loud and ugly. And I hate all of it. It sounds terrible.
It's what Avril Lavigne would sound like if she thought she was Trent Reznor.
It's like
bad.
Yeah,
it's not
awful.
Good.
Sounds just so fucking ugly. That's the best word I can come up with.
30 minutes of like just, I find pretty mediocre pastiches of like very obviously 90s influenced alternative rock and kind of shoegaze inspired music, because that's very much to me the musical sound she's aping from with this project.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the instrumentals are pulled off competently enough. I didn't personally find them as outwardly ugly or horrendous as you seem to, Jake, but I can't take a single word of fault with any of your lyrical or vocal performance criticisms here, because this is absolutely obnoxious and I hated listening to it.
Oh my God, what in the fuck, on the note of both production and vocals, what in the fuck are they doing mixing these vocals so low? What? I had to like change headphones because I was like, are mine broken? What the fuck is happening?
Really confused me about that is that this is produced by Justin Meldal Johnson, who's a great producer who produced the most recent Deaf Heaven record. And one of the things I remember in my very virtuous praise of that record, one of the things I extolled was how, despite the fact that it was such a dense and heavy mix of quite oppressive sounds and the vocals were so clean, they were placed so well, considering all of those things, that they never got drowned out. And yet you have this record which has, that is the exact problem that album's mixing so deftly avoided. which I guess the mixing maybe isn't on Meldor Johnson as much because he produced it. But I struggle to reconcile, to be honest, the way that this, and look, the thing is,
baffling.
I don't have the extreme feelings of hatred that Jake and maybe August have on this record. I think it's pretty mediocre. I don't really care for it. But then again, I'm coming from a perspective of I think the tragedy of Poppy, as I see it, as the Poppy, the musical artist, and I don't necessarily think this is her fault. I think she's doing her best to find her sound, is that she's always either come too late to a particular party, or she's done something and then someone else has come along and done it so much better. Like with her kind of coming onto the scene stuff like Am I a Girl and her initial sort of musical stylings, she was coming hot off the tails of some of the more esoteric PC music artists and that whole chic vibe, like Hannah Diamond, for instance, who I think is much better than she is. It's not to say that those songs sound like Hannah Diamond, they don't, but you can see that's where that inspiration is coming from. And Poppy was not really able to do much to differentiate herself as a personality at that point, which is stunning to me because her whole aesthetic is this performance art thing based on her as a character, as this kind of like, is she human, is she a robot, or whatever
is she
thing.
Dancer?
Yeah, and then with I Disagree, which I still do like have reasonably positive feelings on. Like, I mean, if I want to listen to like raucous pop, heavy metal crossover music from 2020, I'm just gonna listen to the more louder moments of Rina Sawayama's record, or indeed like, I don't know, any sort of, again, one of those kind of more extreme artists. In fact, this is where I get to, obviously Grimes tends to come up in conjunction with Poppy because they've been associated. I think they might have had beef at a certain point. I don't know if that's been resolved. I know that they did a song together. I think it might have been on Am I a Girl, actually, or it was on one of the records that Grimes was on.
Am I a Girl has Play Destroy, which to Poppy's credit is one of her better songs.
It's a good song. And so the thing is, like, and I have a particular, I guess, vantage point here because when I was a teenager, Grimes was big and I was super into Grimes, particularly like Art Angels 2015. Like if you were into indie music in 2015, like indie pop, that was the fucking year of Grimes and Art Angels. That album was huge and it was good too. It still holds up for the most part today. I still really dig that album. I've actually always had much more of an affinity for that louder, more boisterous version of Grimes than the Oblivion, what was the Visions, the album she put out beforehand, which was much more kind of nocturnal and subdued. Had some great singles from 2012, but I've never really dug that album as much. It's kind of murky and boring. But Art Angels is like so bombastic and awesome. Has a song on it called Scream with the Japanese artist Aristophanes, where Grimes did go full sort of new metal and did the whole thing that Poppy does on I Disagree. And because Grimes is not just a fantastic pop figure when she wants to be, she can also produce the shit out of her own records, and she did that. And all of her best bombastic stuff on Art Angels. Like the thing is, like with this album Flux, because I know I've gone away and people are like, well, he's not talking about Flux. I'm going to talk about it now. With Flux, it feels like on paper a smart move for Poppy because it's kind of like a return to center sort of thing. Like she's shown these two different kind of extreme variants of her sound in terms of minimalism and maximalism, I guess. And here is her finding a middle ground, trying to hone her aesthetic, trying to hone her niche, trying especially to fit into this alt-rocky, noise poppy, pop punky fusion of all of these things. And I think that in terms of songwriting and in terms of, I guess, the presence of the musicians on this album, I think is pretty good. Like the performances musically are pretty capable and I would say above average. But it is the songs themselves, and I guess Poppy is a presence and kind of just feeling so lost within this music and so unable to clearly carve out an interesting musical songwriting idea. You get to this stage with it where it fails in having such modest ambitions. It fails to even reach those ambitions. Like to me, Poppy has always been the most enjoyable and the most fascinating when she is the most distinct from everyone else around her. Whereas here is the first time it really feels like, and you kind of got a hint of this with the last record, but here it's like Poppy is trend chasing, and this is diet Grimes. I hate to have to say that because it feels like an easy kind of critique to make, but it is diet. It is like flat. It's like not even just a diet Coke. It's like a flat diet Coke that's been sitting there with a tab open in the sun for a few hours.
The
and it's all
worst
warm.
taste of all time. Ugh.
Yeah, it's all warm, and you can just taste the fucking aspartame when you fucking drink it.
The refrigerator is like up in that flavor.
Yeah,
gosh, it tastes garlic salt from leftover pasta.
And like, I don't, again, because this record is, and look, I'm not going to rule out revisiting this and spending more time with it, because admittedly, I've only heard it twice, but it has left such little impact on me, and I have such a difficult time remembering and distinguishing different aspects of it. I know that I think that certain instrumental and musical parts of, say, around the middle of the record are kind of cool, but I don't remember much more beyond that. I think that the record, does end maybe in a bit more of a kind of distinct place with that closing track. I think that the first opening track is kind of a semi-decent single as well. Like, it at least has a punch to it. But I mean, I'm really grasping at straws at this point. I'm going to have a much more interesting time describing flat, dry Diet Coke than describing this album. And I don't...
It's a punch of paper mache, man. I don't blame you.
And I don't dislike it enough to be like fully comfortable really ripping the fucking shit out of it. So I'll let you guys do that if you want to. But because I know a lot of people do seem to think this is a pretty solid record for her. I think generally it's been received as maybe her most, good best record yet, which, obviously we don't understand, but evidently people like this record quite a lot. So I don't want to take away from that, but I mean, it's a good, this episode has been pretty thematically unified in the sense that we've talked about two brand new releases that people tend to have largely been quite warm on and embracing of in terms of their creator realizing or like seeking out this particular aesthetic that people think they belong in, but us kind of being like, well, it's not really fully committing, or it's not really like doing that in a way that is as interesting as this artist is capable of doing. Again, like with Sufjan, although to a much greater extent here, I would say total half measure. And it's disappointing, and I don't know. That's where I'm at.
I definitely knew I was going to be the coldest on this, and like, I don't want I really dislike this like a lot. Like, I'm sure I dislike it more than even people who generally don't really care for it in general. And I guess it's a couple of things, but I don't want it to come across the fact that it's like I'm some sort of like poppy stan and this isn't what I wanted or whatever. And it's like, no, I like those last two projects just because they were, generally speaking, good projects. They were good music. I have no investment in Poppy as an artist. I don't give a shit.
Not Poppy in her flop era.
Yeah, I mean, look, if this sounds like she's entering it, because like even the idea of Flux is that, like, again, on paper, Tyler's pointing out of just like, trying to refine the maximalist and minimalist parts of her sound. And see, it's like, on paper, good idea, but also it's just like, oh, okay, when you take an artist who's like this and at their most interesting and their most consistent when they're going full throttle on whatever it is that they're doing, and you put them in a washy gray area of sludgy goop, then congratulations, you've sanded off every possible edge that your music has had in the past. And like the way that they mix her vocals combined with the production, like, just makes every weakness that each of these things have that much more apparent. It's because Poppy's voice, and like, it could if I have any complaint about I disagree, it's that occasionally her vocals can get a little bit swallowed by how big and enormous those instrumentals are. Her screaming is good, but it could be better. Here, I mean, my God, it just sounds like all you are left with is the production around her singing voice. And it sounds so nondescript and big and fucking obnoxious. And whenever you can make any of these lyrics out, oh God Christ, they're so patronizing. And like, again, her last album is not like this award-winning piece of journalism or this incredibly incisive thing, but it was honest to an experience, whereas this is like some fake girl boss gatekeep gaslight shit. And she's just like, oh, have you ever noticed if the world is artificial, man, and I'm artificial? Isn't that like fucked up, dude? And I'm like,
gas,
sure.
gate, light, girl.
I mean, like, you could legitimately copy and paste the absolutely awful review that Pitchfork gave to Nine Inch Nails, The Fragile, and like put it for this for me. And then that's basically what I think, except I'm not full of shit. Because, you know, Trent Reznor, we've talked about him on this podcast. We've talked about a Nine Inch Nails album. And one of the things we had to say about Year Zero was that a couple things that actually has in common with this album is that, you know, the production on that album is a little bit more flat, a little bit more robotic, and Trent's lyricism is not particularly subtle or nuanced or whatever, but it makes up for it in personality and punch. And the personality here is either irritating or boring, so it doesn't fucking do anything. And then the personality, well, wait, I'm tripping over my own fucking words because this album is the fucking length of a sitcom. It's not interesting, and sitting through it feels like I'm watching Magnolia. You know, God, it just you mentioning sucks.
You mentioning Trent Reznor just made me think, like, what I wanted this record to be is a record that already came out this year, that already exists, and that is Halsey's "If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power." That is
baffling.
That is the successful, and I mean, that record is not perfect either, but it is the successful iteration of what this album is trying to be. And so what I'm saying is, Poppy, use your connections, see if you can get Trent on the team, because you might
You're at a point where you can get a Trent Reznor, where you can get somebody who knows how to do this.
I'll tell you what. Forget Trent Reznor, because Poppy might not have the pull to get Trent Reznor, but I know someone who she could get. Someone who is at maybe the lowest point in their life at the moment, who's going through a really difficult time, who probably could do with a bit of a boost, who probably could do with being brought back into the public consciousness in a positive way as well, that producing a record for Poppy might actually do for them. And that person is, of course...
I'm so frightened right now.
That person is, of course, Grimes. Time to mend fences. Time to make up. Grimes and Poppy, time to fix things.
Give me the Elon Musk breakup album. Do it. Just do it.
I mean, I'm sure whatever Grimes does next will be, you know, worthy of conversation at the very least. But Poppy, get Grimes.
Grimes, make your star crossed. Oh, wait.
Oh. Get Grimes to produce your next record. Figure the shit out.
You know, star-crossed, but written from the perspective of a sociopath writing about another complete fucking sociopath sounds better than star-crossed.
Oh, it would be better.
You got a point.
Totally.
Yeah.
Morgan, what do you think of this album? I guess it's probably clear, but
it's like, I don't care. I don't fucking care. I think the idea of, like, there are moments where it shines through of like this version of like Avril Lavigne girl pop punk that she's going for here, but like through the lens of someone who's been really jilted by the industry, and in particular men in the industry. That has something to it. I enjoy the track Her for the most clear picture of this, I think. But it's also like most of this album, the album's just bad is the thing about that whole concept, is just like, you know, it's just a weak, underdeveloped, undercooked, bad sounding bleh.
Yeah. If I may, I'd like to conclude this segment by addressing Miss Poppy directly.
Oh no.
With some words I'd like to say to her. I think something that maybe she needs to hear, which is that, Poppy, if your right hand is causing you pain, cut it off. If the colors have started to run, let them all run away from you. We were hoping for some romance. All we found was more despair. We must talk about our problems, Poppy. We are in a state of flux. We need to talk.
The way your mouth was fighting not to develop into a smile at the end there was more struggle than I've seen on like anything. Like I've seen like half dead animals give up quicker.
Favorite tracks and ratings.
Oh, fuck
I'll
me.
go first. My 3 favorite tracks are probably the first track, Flux. I'll say Hysteria, sure, and Never Find My Place. Least favorite track is So Mean, and I'm giving it a 5.
As a favorite, I'll say Her. The only other one I gave even a fraction of a shit about was what's that kind of dream poppy? As Strange as It Seems. That's what I have written. I think that's the one. Least favorite is On the Level. I think the hook in that song is annoying as shit. And I'll give this yeah. I will give this a 4.5 out of 10.
Yeah, well, prepare the sign, Morgan. You know the one, because my 3 favorite tracks are gonna have to be Chinese Satellite, and Chinese Satellite.
Wonderful picks.
My least favorite, fucking I don't care, fucking So Mean, whatever. 4 out of
I Don't
10.
Care could have been the title of a song on here.
I don't. Yeah.
Sounds like it. My favorite track
Leave
is
me alone.
Never Find My Place. My 3 least favorite tracks are So Mean. I just fucking hate Hysteria and Bloom. That middle of the album's a fucking slog. Yeah, 3 out of 10.
Why is this half-hour album so long?
It feels so long. It feels so.
Okay.
Oh God.
Well, it's over now. And that's a 4.1 rating. So congratulations. You played yourself.
Myth. Actually wait. One following point is that I cannot get over the fact that the cover art to this album looks like Poppy with a big giant dick.
Oh yeah,
Like, look at it. It just looks like she's got like a huge dick and she's just holding it. Like she's just on her knees kind of. And it's just like, yeah.
I love Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor.
Good for her.
I do.
Good for her.
Good for her.
On Tuesday, as we said at the top of this video, we're going to be releasing our examination of Toby Mac and his legendary 2004 release, Welcome
Opus.
to Diversity. So do not miss that. I don't give a shit if you have heard the album or not. That video, it's got to be worth something. So you need to watch it.
Tyler at the beginning of this episode. Yeah, I don't know. It probably helped to have heard the album in question before you watch the episode. So you can like listen along at that point, and then Tyler at the end of the episode. I don't give a fuck. Just fucking watch this damn video so I don't hang myself.
August. Seen us
All
out.
right. Fucking, you know what? As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. McDonald's, I'm loving it.